Elsie's hands, perpetually dusted with flour, were as familiar to the town of Dust Creek as the rising sun. They kneaded, shaped, and coaxed life from simple ingredients, transforming them into loaves of golden brown perfection. Her bakery, a small, sun-drenched haven on Main Street, was the heart of the community. The air, thick with the comforting scent of warm bread, drew townsfolk in like moths to a flame. Children with sticky fingers pressed their noses against the window, their eyes wide with anticipation. Farmers, weary from the fields, stopped in for a hearty rye to fuel their journey home. Even the stoic sheriff couldn't resist Elsie's sourdough, its tangy aroma a welcome contrast to the dust and grit of his job. But Elsie was more than just a baker. She was a keeper of secrets, a silent confidant, and a beacon of hope in a town where hope often felt as scarce as water in the dry season. Her days were filled with the honest labor of baking, but her nights held a secret, a mission fueled by compassion and a deep sense of justice. The jail, a grim stone structure at the edge of town, held men who were often forgotten. Some were guilty, no doubt, but others, Elsie had heard whispers, seen the despair in their eyes during their brief public appearances. She suspected that some had been caught in the gears of a flawed system, victims of circumstance or prejudice. And so, under the cloak of darkness, Elsie began her clandestine deliveries. Hidden beneath a thick shawl, she'd carry a basket laden with freshly baked loaves, still warm from the oven. The aroma alone seemed to cut through the heavy atmosphere of the jail, offering a momentary respite from the cold, hard reality of their confinement. The guards, mostly weary and underpaid, turned a blind eye. They knew Elsie, they knew her kindness. And perhaps, deep down, they understood that a little bit of warmth and comfort could make a world of difference, even within those stone walls. The flour-dusted hands that offered bread also offered something more precious, a listening ear. The metal bars of the jail cell were cold against Elsie's warm hands as she passed the bread through. The scent of caraway and rye filled the small space, a stark contrast to the stale, musty air that usually permeated the jail. Inside, a young man named Thomas accepted the loaf with a weary smile. His face, gaunt and pale, was framed by unruly brown hair. He'd been accused of stealing cattle, a crime he vehemently denied, claiming he'd simply been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Thank you, Elsie," he mumbled, his voice raspy. "You're a true angel." Elsie simply nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and concern. She didn't pry, but she listened. Thomas, like the others, needed someone to hear his story, someone who wouldn't judge him based on the accusations leveled against him. He spoke of his family, his dreams of owning a small farm, and the injustice of his situation. Elsie listened, her flour-dusted fingers tracing patterns on the rough fabric of her shawl. In another cell, old Silas, a grizzled prospector, clutched his bread with trembling hands. Accused of assault during a drunken brawl, Silas insisted he'd only been defending himself. His story was rambling and punctuated by coughs, but Elsie patiently pieced together the events, sensing a kernel of truth buried beneath the layers of alcohol and exaggeration. The aroma of the bread seemed to calm him, softening the harsh lines etched on his weathered face. Each loaf was more than just food, it was a symbol of hope, a reminder that someone cared. As Elsie moved from cell to cell, the scent of her bread lingered, a fragrant promise of warmth and understanding in the cold, unforgiving atmosphere. She didn't offer legal advice or false promises, but she offered something equally valuable. A safe space to speak, a moment of human connection in a place of isolation and despair. Her flour-dusted hands, usually busy kneading dough, now held the weight of their stories, their hopes, and their fears. She was their baker, their friend, and their silent advocate. And with each passing night, her resolve to help them grew stronger, fueled by the scent of warm bread and the whispers of injustice. Elsie's nightly routine was precise, a carefully choreographed dance of secrecy and compassion. After the last customer had left her bakery and the shutters were bolted tight, she'd begin. The rhythmic kneading of the dough, a familiar lullaby, was her cover. It masked the sounds of her true purpose. She'd bake extra loaves, each one slightly larger, slightly richer than those sold in the shop. These were special, imbued with a silent promise. As the moon climbed high in the inky sky, casting long shadows across Dust Creek, Elsie would prepare her basket. A thick woolen blanket lined the bottom, cradling the precious cargo. On top, she'd place a small, worn book of poems, a silent offering for those who craved something more than just sustenance. The scent of baking bread clung to her clothes, a comforting aroma that both grounded her and set her apart. The route to the jail was familiar, each creaking floorboard of her house, each uneven cobblestone on the street, memorized over countless journeys. She avoided the main thoroughfare, opting for the shadowed alleyways and back streets, her footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The weight of the basket was a constant reminder of her mission, a physical manifestation of the burdens she carried in her heart. Reaching the jail, she'd approach the back entrance, a place where the shadows were deepest and the silence most profound. A prearranged signal, a soft knock, a whispered word alerted the guard on duty. These men, often hardened by years of witnessing the darker side of humanity, seemed to soften in Elsie's presence. They knew she wasn't a threat. They saw the genuine compassion in her eyes, the unwavering determination in her step. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, the power of a simple act of kindness in a world filled with cruelty and indifference. And so they allowed her to pass, turning a blind eye to her clandestine deliveries, knowing that Elsie's flour-dusted hands brought a glimmer of light into the darkest corners of their town. The scent of warm bread became a symbol of hope, a fragrant reminder that even in the depths of despair, humanity could still prevail. Thomas wasn't a cattle thief. He was a dreamer, a young man with calloused hands and a heart full of hope. He'd been saving every penny to buy a small plot of land, enough to build a home for his sweetheart Mary. But one fateful night, while camping near the Oakhaven Ranch, a herd of cattle went missing. Thomas, being the only stranger in the area, was immediately accused. The evidence was circumstantial at best, but the ranch owner, a powerful and influential man, had made up his mind. Thomas's pleas of innocence fell on deaf ears. Elsie, listening to his story, saw the genuine fear and desperation in his eyes. She believed him. Silas, the grizzled prospector, wasn't a violent man. He was a survivor, hardened by years of battling the harsh elements. The brawl at the saloon had started over a card game, fueled by whiskey and old grudges. Silas had been defending himself against a much younger, stronger man who had accused him of cheating. The details were hazy, clouded by alcohol and conflicting accounts, but Elsie sensed that Silas had acted in self-defense. He was more bark than bite, a lonely old man struggling to hold on to his dignity. Then there was Martha, a young woman accused of witchcraft. Her crime: possessing knowledge of herbs and remedies, skills passed down through generations of women in her family. The townsfolk, gripped by fear and superstition, had turned against her, fueled by whispers and rumors. Elsie, a woman of practicality and common sense, saw through the ignorance and prejudice. Martha was a healer, not a witch, a woman whose knowledge could benefit the community, not harm it. Each prisoner had a story, a tale of hardship and injustice. And as Elsie listened, her role as a baker transformed into something more profound. She became their confidant, their advocate, the only person who seemed to care about their fate. Her flour-dusted hands, once symbols of simple labor, now represented hope, compassion, and a silent promise to fight for justice, one loaf of bread, one whispered conversation at a time. The scent of warm bread, mingling with the despair of the jail, became a fragrant reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity and hope could still endure. Seasons turned, years blurred into a tapestry of sun-drenched days and moonlit nights. Dust Creek remained a small, isolated town, clinging to its traditions and its secrets. The jail, a constant reminder of the darker aspects of life, continued to house a rotating cast of characters, each with their own story of misfortune or misjudgment. And Elsie, her hair now streaked with silver, continued her nightly deliveries. Her flour-dusted hands, though marked with age, moved with the same practiced grace, kneading the dough, shaping the loaves, imbuing them with the same unwavering compassion. The scent of her bread, a constant presence in Dust Creek, became synonymous with hope, a beacon in the darkness for those who had been forgotten. New guards came and went, each initially skeptical of Elsie's nocturnal activities, but ultimately won over by her quiet dignity and the palpable impact she had on the prisoners. They saw the flicker of hope in their eyes when she arrived, the brief respite from despair that her simple act of kindness provided. The aroma of her bread seemed to soften the harsh edges of the jail, creating a temporary sanctuary of warmth and understanding. Thomas, Silas, and Martha had long since been released, their fates uncertain. Some whispered that Thomas had eventually found his land, his Mary by his side. Others claimed Silas had struck gold, finally finding the fortune he had sought for so long. Martha, it was said, had moved to a neighboring town where her healing skills were appreciated, not feared. But their stories and the stories of countless others remained etched in Elsie's heart, fueling her commitment to her secret mission. She knew she couldn't change the world, but she could make a difference, one loaf of bread, one whispered conversation at a time. Her flour-dusted hands, weathered and worn, were a testament to her unwavering dedication, a symbol of hope for the forgotten men, a fragrant reminder that even in the face of injustice, kindness could still prevail. The scent of warm bread, forever intertwined with her legacy, would linger long after she was gone. The stagecoach rattled into Dust Creek, stirring up a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured the setting sun. As the dust settled, a tall, imposing figure emerged, his face etched with a stoic expression. This was Judge Harding, the newly appointed judge for the district, a man whose reputation preceded him. He was known for his unwavering fairness, his sharp intellect, and his uncanny ability to see through deception. But beneath the stern exterior lay a past shrouded in mystery, a secret he guarded closely. Judge Harding surveyed the town with a discerning eye. Dust Creek was a far cry from the bustling cities he had known, a place where life moved at a slower pace, where the scent of sagebrush and pine mingled with the ever-present aroma of Elsie's bread. He took in the weathered buildings, the dusty streets, and the faces of the townsfolk, each etched with their own unique stories. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, his gaze unwavering, his movements deliberate. He wore a simple, well-worn suit, his only adornment a silver pocket watch, a memento of a life he had left behind. There was an air of quiet authority about him, a sense that he had seen and experienced more than he let on. His arrival sparked a mix of curiosity and apprehension among the townsfolk. Some welcomed him with open arms, hoping he would bring justice and order to their community. Others eyed him with suspicion, wary of outsiders and the changes they might bring. Elsie, watching from her bakery window, felt a strange sense of familiarity, a faint echo of a memory she couldn't quite grasp. There was something about the judge's eyes, a certain sadness and understanding that resonated with her. She couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to him, sensing that he was more than just a judge, that he carried a burden of his own. As he passed by her bakery, a subtle shift in the air brought the scent of warm bread to him, and for a fleeting moment, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. The scent, though faint, triggered a cascade of memories, a long-forgotten feeling of hope and comfort. The flour-dusted hands of a kind woman, a warm loaf of bread in the darkness, it was all coming back to him slowly, like a melody he had once known by heart. Years ago, before he was Judge Harding, he was just John, a young surveyor wrongly accused of arson. A fire had ravaged a local lumber mill, and John, who had been mapping the area, was an easy target. The evidence was flimsy, fueled by the mill owner's desire for revenge against a rival company. John, innocent but powerless, was thrown into the Dust Creek jail. The days were long and filled with despair. The food was meager, the conditions harsh, and hope dwindled with each passing hour. He clung to his memories of freedom, of the open sky and the smell of pine needles, but even those began to fade. Then one night, a miracle arrived in the form of Elsie's bread. The scent of caraway and rye cut through the stale air, bringing a wave of warmth and comfort. Her flour-dusted hands, reaching through the bars, offered not just sustenance, but also a sense of human connection. Elsie listened to his story, her eyes filled with compassion. She didn't judge him, didn't dismiss his pleas of innocence. She simply listened, offering a silent affirmation of his humanity. The bread, warm and fragrant, was a symbol of her belief in him, a reminder that he wasn't forgotten. Night after night, Elsie continued her deliveries, her presence a lifeline in the darkness. John devoured the bread, savoring each bite, not just for the nourishment it provided, but also for the hope it represented. He read the poem she left, finding solace in the words, a brief escape from the confines of his prison. It was Elsie's kindness, her unwavering belief in his innocence, that sustained him through those dark days. She gave him the strength to hold on to hope, to fight for his freedom. He vowed that if he ever escaped this nightmare, he would dedicate his life to seeking justice for others, to ensuring that no one else suffered the same fate he had endured. He never forgot the scent of her bread, the touch of her flour-dusted hands, the quiet compassion in her eyes. These memories became his guiding stars, the foundation upon which he rebuilt his life. And now, years later, fate had brought him back to Dust Creek, to the woman who had saved him, the baker with the heart of gold and the hands of an angel. Judge Harding settled into his new role with quiet determination. The courtroom, a somber space filled with the weight of past judgments, became his sanctuary. He spent hours poring over old case files, his brow furrowed in concentration. The dim light of the oil lamp cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the lines of fatigue etched on his face. He started with the oldest cases, those that had been gathering dust for years. He meticulously reviewed the evidence, scrutinizing the testimonies, searching for inconsistencies. As he delved deeper, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Cases built on flimsy evidence, testimonies that seemed rehearsed, judgments that appeared unduly harsh. He noticed a recurring name, Silas Blackwood, a wealthy landowner with a reputation for ruthlessness. Blackwood seemed to be involved, directly or indirectly, in many of the questionable cases. Land disputes, accusations of theft, even a few instances of violence, Blackwood's influence seemed to permeate them all. Judge Harding suspected corruption, a rot that had festered within the town's legal system for far too long. He remembered his own unjust imprisonment, the fabricated evidence, the biased judge. He knew firsthand the devastating consequences of a system that favored the powerful and ignored the plight of the innocent. The scent of Elsie's bread, a faint but persistent memory, fueled his determination. He couldn't let history repeat itself. He couldn't allow innocent people to suffer the same fate he had endured. He would expose the corruption, bring justice to those who had been wronged, and restore faith in the legal system. He began to discreetly question witnesses, seeking out those who had been silenced or ignored. He listened patiently to their stories, his eyes filled with empathy. He saw the fear in their eyes, the scars of past injustices. He knew he was walking a dangerous path, that exposing Blackwood and his cronies would not be easy. But he was prepared to face the consequences. He owed it to Elsie, to himself, and to all those who had been wronged by the corrupt system. The flour-dusted hands of justice were about to deliver a long-overdue reckoning. The threat loomed over Dust Creek like a gathering storm. Silas Blackwood, emboldened by years of unchecked power, had begun to systematically seize land from smaller farmers, using legal loopholes and intimidation tactics. He claimed ownership based on outdated surveys and dubious contracts, forcing families from their homes, their livelihoods destroyed. Elsie watched with growing concern as her neighbors, good, honest people she had known for years, faced ruin. Old Man Hemlock, whose family had farmed his land for generations, was served with an eviction notice, accused of trespassing on Blackwood's property. Sarah Miller, a widow struggling to raise her children, faced a similar fate, her small farm coveted by Blackwood for its access to the river. These weren't just legal battles, they were personal attacks on the very fabric of Dust Creek. Elsie knew these families, had shared meals with them, celebrated their joys, and mourned their losses. She saw the fear in their eyes, the desperation in their voices. She felt their pain as if it were her own. Her flour-dusted hands trembled as she kneaded the dough, the rhythmic motion no longer bringing her comfort. The scent of warm bread, usually a source of solace, now carried a tinge of bitterness. She felt helpless, unable to protect her neighbors from Blackwood's greed. She knew she couldn't stand idly by while injustice prevailed. She had to do something, anything, to help them. She thought of Judge Harding, his stern but fair demeanor, the faint scent of bread that seemed to cling to him. Could he be the one to stop Blackwood? Could he bring justice to Dust Creek? She decided to visit him, to share her concerns, to plead for his help. She gathered a basket of her best bread, hoping that the familiar scent, the symbol of her compassion, would reach him, would remind him of the values he had sworn to uphold. Her flour-dusted hands, carrying the weight of her community's hopes, knocked on the door of the judge's chambers, a silent prayer on her lips. The scent of warm bread filled the air, a fragrant plea for justice in a town threatened by greed and corruption. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Elsie sat in the back, her flour-dusted hands clasped tightly in her lap. The scent of her bread, a subtle reminder of hope and compassion, seemed to permeate the room, a silent counterpoint to the tension that hung heavy in the air. Judge Harding entered, his face stern but his eyes filled with a quiet determination. He carried himself with an air of authority, his presence commanding respect. He placed the basket of Elsie's bread on his bench, the aroma subtly filling the room. He knew what he had to do. The first case was Old Man Hemlock's. Blackwood's lawyer presented his case, relying on the same outdated survey and dubious contract that had been used to threaten Hemlock, but Judge Harding was prepared. He had meticulously researched the case, uncovering inconsistencies and exposing the flaws in Blackwood's claims. He called witnesses who testified to Hemlock's rightful ownership of the land, their voices trembling but their resolve unwavering. He presented evidence that contradicted Blackwood's claims, revealing a pattern of manipulation and deceit. With each piece of evidence, with each witness testimony, the tension in the courtroom grew. Blackwood's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Elsie watched, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, Judge Harding spoke, his voice clear and resonant. He declared that Blackwood's claims were baseless, that Old Man Hemlock was the rightful owner of his land. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. The next case was Sarah Miller's. Again, Blackwood's lawyer presented the same flimsy evidence, the same intimidation tactics, but Judge Harding was unyielding. He exposed the flaws in Blackwood's claims, protected Sarah Miller from his harassment, and ruled in her favor. One by one, Judge Harding overturned the unjust sentences, exposing Blackwood's corruption and restoring justice to Dust Creek. He drew upon his knowledge of the past, his understanding of right and wrong, and the faint but persistent memory of Elsie's kindness. The scent of her bread, a reminder of hope and compassion, guided his decisions, fueling his determination to bring fairness to a town that had been plagued by injustice for far too long. The flour-dusted hands of justice were finally at work. Elsie watched, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and humility. Her flour-dusted hands, usually busy kneading dough or offering comfort, were now clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She recognized the fire in Judge Harding's eyes, the unwavering determination in his voice. She knew without a doubt that he was fighting for justice, not just for her neighbors, but for everyone who had been wronged by Blackwood's greed. She thought back to those nights in the jail, the faces of the forgotten men, their stories of hardship and injustice. She remembered Thomas, Silas, and Martha, their hopes and dreams crushed by a corrupt system. She realized with a profound sense of clarity that her small acts of kindness, her whispered conversations, her loaves of bread, had made a difference. She had planted a seed of hope in John's heart, a seed that had grown into a mighty tree, bearing the fruit of justice and compassion. Her flour-dusted hands, once symbols of simple labor, had become instruments of change, inspiring a young man to dedicate his life to fighting for what was right. A wave of emotion washed over her, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a deep sense of satisfaction. She had always believed in the power of kindness, in the importance of standing up for what was right. And now she was witnessing the culmination of her efforts, the realization of her dreams. As Judge Harding continued to overturn the unjust sentences, Elsie felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Dust Creek would never be the same, that the scales of justice had finally been balanced. Her flour-dusted hands, no longer trembling, were now symbols of hope and resilience, a testament to the power of one person to make a difference in the world. The scent of warm bread, forever intertwined with her legacy, filled the courtroom, a fragrant reminder that even in the face of adversity, kindness and compassion could prevail. She knew that the aroma of baking bread would forever remind Judge Harding of what he was fighting for. Judge Harding, having overturned the unjust sentences, wasn't finished. He knew that exposing the corruption was only the first step. He had to confront the corrupt officials, reveal their scheme, and ensure that they were held accountable for their actions. He summoned Silas Blackwood and his cronies to the courtroom. The atmosphere was electric, the tension palpable. The townsfolk, emboldened by Judge Harding's unwavering commitment to justice, filled the courtroom, their eyes fixed on Blackwood and his associates. Judge Harding presented his evidence, meticulously laying out the details of Blackwood's scheme. He revealed the outdated surveys, the dubious contracts, the manipulated testimonies. He exposed the web of deceit that Blackwood had spun, ensnaring innocent people in his greedy grasp. He called witnesses who testified to Blackwood's intimidation tactics, their voices trembling but their stories compelling. He presented documents that proved Blackwood had bribed officials, manipulated the legal system, and profited from the suffering of others. Blackwood and his cronies tried to deny the charges, but their denials rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Judge Harding, his voice resonating with righteous anger, condemned their actions, declaring that they had betrayed the trust of the community and violated the principles of justice. He stripped Blackwood of his ill-gotten gains, returning the stolen land to its rightful owners. He ordered the corrupt officials to be arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. He declared that Dust Creek would no longer tolerate corruption, that justice would prevail, and that the voices of the innocent would be heard. A cheer erupted in the courtroom, a collective expression of relief and gratitude. Elsie watched, her flour-dusted hands clasped in prayer, tears streaming down her face. She had witnessed a miracle, a transformation of her community, a triumph of good over evil. The scent of warm bread, a symbol of hope and compassion, filled the air, a fragrant celebration of justice and redemption. Judge Harding had freed Elsie's neighbors, and in doing so, he had freed Dust Creek. Dust Creek erupted in celebration. The townsfolk, freed from Blackwood's oppressive grip, gathered in the town square, their faces beaming with joy. They danced, they sang, they shared stories of hardship and resilience. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the unmistakable scent of Elsie's bread. They recognized Judge Harding as their savior, a man who had come to their town and restored justice to their lives. They lauded his unwavering commitment to fairness, his sharp intellect, and his courage in the face of corruption. They knew that he had risked everything to protect them, and they were eternally grateful. But they also recognized Elsie's quiet heroism, her unwavering compassion, and her steadfast belief in the power of kindness. They knew that she had been the heart and soul of Dust Creek for years, a beacon of hope in a town often shrouded in darkness. They showered her with praise, thanking her for her selfless acts, her comforting words, and her delicious bread. They knew that she had inspired Judge Harding, that her kindness had set him on the path to justice. A group of children presented Elsie with a bouquet of wildflowers, their faces bright with admiration. Old Man Hemlock, his eyes filled with tears, embraced her, thanking her for her unwavering support. Sarah Miller, her children clinging to her side, offered her a heartfelt thank you, her voice choked with emotion. The town council organized a special ceremony in Elsie's honor, presenting her with a plaque recognizing her years of service to the community. Judge Harding stood by her side, his eyes filled with admiration and gratitude. He knew that he couldn't have done it without her, that her kindness had been the catalyst for change. The scent of warm bread filled the town square, a fragrant symbol of hope, compassion, and justice. Dust Creek had been transformed, its spirit renewed, its future bright. And at the heart of it all was Elsie, the baker with the flour-dusted hands and the heart of gold, the woman who had inspired a revolution of kindness and compassion. The celebration of justice had only just begun. Back in her bakery, Elsie kneaded the dough with a renewed sense of purpose. Her flour-dusted hands moved with practiced ease, shaping the loaves, imbuing them with a silent blessing. The scent of warm bread filled the air, no longer just a comforting aroma, but a symbol of hope, redemption, and the enduring power of kindness. She thought of John, now Judge Harding, a man who had overcome adversity, embraced justice, and transformed her community. She knew that her small acts of kindness had played a role in his journey, that her loaves of bread had sustained him through his darkest hours. She realized that even the smallest gestures of compassion could have a profound impact, that even the most humble individuals could make a difference in the world. Her flour-dusted hands, once symbols of simple labor, had become instruments of change, inspiring a revolution of kindness and compassion. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a visitor. Elsie looked up and smiled. It was Judge Harding. He carried a loaf of her bread, its golden-brown crust glistening in the afternoon light. "Elsie," he said, his voice filled with gratitude, "I just wanted to thank you for everything." Elsie smiled, her eyes twinkling. "You did it, John. You brought justice to Dust Creek." "But I couldn't have done it without you," he replied. "Your kindness, your compassion, your bread, they inspired me to keep fighting, to never give up." They shared a quiet moment of gratitude, their hearts filled with a deep sense of connection. The scent of warm bread filled the bakery, a fragrant reminder of their shared history, their unwavering belief in the power of good. As Judge Harding left, Elsie watched him walk down Main Street, his head held high, his steps